Yes, I do.
Okay, it's recording now.
Okay, got it. Okay. So if you remember back towards last December of 2018 and this January, there was that government shutdown. And during that time, over the course of a couple of weeks, government workers were without pay for weeks on end, and contractors and some of the workers didn't even have a job for that time. And there was a lot of news articles at the time that were covering, what sort of stress is this putting on those workers, not getting paid but still having to work. And they found that a lot of these workers were living paycheck to paycheck. Eventually, as the weeks of the shutdown went on, these articles started to question more broadly how many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And that's what my goal is today, is to figure out why do Americans live paycheck to paycheck and how many live this way. Well, according to a CNBC article during the time the government shut down, 78% of Americans that are employed are living paycheck to paycheck. That's about 4 in 5. So my question is, are you one of them? If you aren't, the chances are you know someone or your family with someone that is living paycheck to paycheck. And I guess some of the reasons that, we should be looking at this is because we have to figure out why. And these Americans are oftentimes stuck with harsh economic situations, such as they're in high debt, they're not financially literate, or maybe household expenses has changed. So let's move on to talking about that debt. Tons of Americans are in debt. There's lots of different types of debts that Americans can and are in debt for. So those are things like credit cards, student loans, mortgages, car loans, personal loans. All of these are really putting a lot of pressure on Americans because you have to pay back loans and you have to pay back debt, or else you're going to face serious repercussions. Talking about debt as a statistic, there was this survey that was conducted by Nitro College of 1,000 people, and they found that of baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, around 80% of all of those generations are in debt. Collectively, Americans have a consumer debt of around $13 trillion. Our national GDP is around $19 trillion, just to put that in perspective. And that was cited as by debt.org. So there's a good likelihood that debt is a major factor when considering why are Americans living paycheck to paycheck. But is there a reason for this debt? Well, one way to ask is, maybe it's because Americans aren't financially literate. So financial literacy is understanding how to budget and how to manage your personal finances, as well as understanding more broader economic concepts such as compound interest and inflation. And this is important for several reasons, and I don't want to get into too many, but one of the most important is compound interest. Compound interest is affecting those debts that I just talked about. The more you're in debt, the more that debt is going to grow and the harder it is to pay off. But it could also be used to help Americans, because if you invest, your compound interest will have your money grow and work for you. So compound interest is a double-edged sword that Americans don't really know about. There was this article by the Tennyson that covers this topic, and they found that only 57% of Americans are considered financially literate. That is 14th place in the world, but we're only ahead of Botswana, which has a lot less people and an economy with a GDP 1,000 times less the size of the United States. Just to put that in perspective. Another reason why there's such a low financial literacy rate in America is because money is often seen as a taboo subject in many households, because there's a lot of feelings involved with the topic. And one thing is, we don't teach financial literacy in schools, and we put it to parents to teach their kids, but if parents aren't financially literate, how could they teach their kids? But now we've reached a point where, we have to ask, does financial illiteracy cause people to go into debt, Or does being in debt mean someone is financially illiterate? Which is proving causation, which isn't what I'm setting out to do. I'm interpreting this I'm interpreting this information to mean that financial illiteracy and consumer debt are both major factors concerning why Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that there's at least a third that I haven't talked about yet. And that's expenses have grown while wages have stagnated in recent years. There's been a lot of talk in the media over the past couple of years about housing costs and tuition and how this has impacted households with higher mortgages, higher rents, and higher education costs. All of these have become less affordable as has gone on. Another big concern is wage stagnation. And this is that wages are not growing fast enough to actually grow. So consider this hypothetical situation. Let's say you get a 3% raise this year. Awesome. You think you have more spending money. But let's say that the inflation rate at the same time is 5% that year. That means your wage has actually shrunk 2%. You are worse off than you were the previous year just because of inflation. So while this situation is exaggerated, it does highlight the core problem of wage stagnation. That is, wages aren't growing if they're only keeping up with inflation. So together with increased expenses and stagnating wages, that means Americans have less money to spare and spend on other things. So my conclusion is that Americans are in a lot of debt, they aren't financially literate, and they had to deal with more expenses with stagnating wages. And all of these are major factors to consider when talking about why Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. They all play some role in how our society has got to this point. There's this old adage that comes to mind when it comes to this type of situation, and that is to work smarter and not harder. There's value in hard work, and there's a sense of pride that can be brought from it. However, smarter work is more valuable to me because it saves me time and energy. It's also saving me money and stress. I can afford to build savings and pay for college out of pocket because I'm not worried about when my next paycheck is coming in. And I think it's important to recognize that I'm one of the lucky ones and that we should try to expand this opportunity to everyone. We, as a country, we see ourselves as a land of opportunity, but there's a lot of us that are disadvantaged, and we should do something about that. Thank you. Oh, still record. Thoughts?
Ladies first.
Okay.
Like, how's my delivery? Was I looking at the paper too much, or?
So one thing I felt was that you were rushing to get through the subject matter and get through your speech. It would help to slow down a little bit when you are giving a speech, and give more of a pause break between your subject matters.
Yeah, as much as I'd love to, I have to meet the time limit.
Well, you definitely met the time limit.
No, I do. I can't go over it.
It's 5 to 8.
It's 5 to 7, so I'm trying to squeeze it.
We're a little over 7 minutes.
Yeah, so there's a reason why.
So probably couldn't hurt in that knowledge to also maybe edit your work a little more.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Dad?
Take larger breaths when you're in between your sentences.
Okay.
It'll help you keep your thoughts clearer.
I thought it was good that you didn't use a lot of filler words like this, that kind of stuff. So you,
I actually forgot to do something, whatever.
I wouldn't have known that.
Because I meant to, like, there was this whole thing about establishing credibility that I put in the introduction, but I totally, like, forgot to do that. Because it was supposed to parallel with the conclusion. That's how I wrote it, but I just totally forgot.
So one thing is, if you're doing a speech rather than have a paper, is to have more like bullet points.
Yeah, I'm going to have a note card for it. I'm not going to have this, so.
To have note cards or whatever, and that way you can.
Yeah.
because when it's hard to see something out, like talking out loud and then see something on the paper. So
Yeah.
that would be a suggestion if you might want time. Anything else you can think
No, I think it was well thought out.
All right.
Alright.
Do you want me to just stop now so you can watch The Little Mermaid?
We're not watching Little Mermaid, sorry.
I think Mom is. So,
I don't know.
all right, I'm gonna turn this off.